Welcome to this Getting Started with SharePoint Framework tutorial series, and in this tutorial we'll have a look on how we can use the Office UI Fabric React components in our SharePoint client-side web port. Or technically the process is exactly the same if we would be using the Office UI Fabric React components in any SharePoint Framework solution. This is January 2020 edition, and I'm using SharePoint Framework 1.10 version on this exercise. And please note, if you're watching this video later on, and there might be small changes in the newer versions of SharePoint Framework, so please always double check the documentation, which is always being kept up most up to date from a guidance perspective. Now let's actually jump into it. So let me go to our Windows 10 machine, which we're gonna use for our development exercise, our development environment. Let me go to my C code folder where I already have some example solutions which are created in other tutorials as well. And then here I'm gonna do DocumentCard example, a web part solution, and I'm gonna actually go there. And in here, we're going to execute the Yeoman generator for SharePoint Framework. So we get our basic structure created based on the default settings. Now we're going to use the default solution name. We're going to target SharePoint Online, and we're going to use the current folder because already at the specific folder. We can use the tenant-wide deployment. We're not going to actually do that, but for the exercise perspective, it doesn't really matter what we answer on those. But the web part is the target solution, what we want to create. And we're going to call our web part as a document card example. So we're going to build a document card with a static assets, but using the Office UI Fabric React controls. And this is document card example description, which was the default value. So now I actually changed that slightly with a small typo, but that's fine. And we're gonna choose a React as the target environment in here. So let's click enter from there. And that's gonna then scaffold our solution. And this is gonna take again a few minutes. So let's actually gonna speed up the video and continue after a few seconds. Good, so the solution structure has been now scaffolded, and let's actually clean up the window slightly and open up the window in the Visual Studio Code. So go dot, and that's going to open up that in the Visual Studio Code. Let's close up the welcome as well. What we're interested in here, first of all, let's have a look on the web part structure slightly more detailed. So this time we actually have this components folder here. And if we open up the actual web part file, the manifest file looks exactly the same, but the web part file actually has slightly different structure. So we're actually referencing the actual component from the components folder. And in our render, we are actually using React and rendering that component. So the document card example component from the component side. And that's where the actual rendering of the rendering logic is actually being defined. We do bypass the description over there, which is then being actually rendered in this props and description. So we're using the React way of handling and creating these components, rendering things. Now, let's actually modify this slightly. So let's modify the imports and entries in here. So I'm going to actually add a few additional imports on top. So we're going to use the default Office UI Fabric React version, which is scaffolded by default available in the React-based structures. Also, let's actually modify the render method within this component. So we can more easily render the file, or we could actually render slightly different layout out from the web part. So let's save the changes on that as well. Now, the next thing, what we can actually see here is that we do have a few different images referenced, and we actually need to get those images downloaded from a centralized location. So let's actually make that happen. So there's one image over there, there's another one over there, and another one over there. And these actually are available in our GitHub location. So let me actually copy the location, and let's go in browser. So let's actually start downloading these assets. So let's actually download that asset. and save image as. And based on the documentation and the guidance, we should be saving that one in the components folder, which is completely fine. So that is a good location for all of those things. So let's actually open up that in an Explorer. I'm just going to go and copy the path in the source web parts there, components, and there we go. So copy that one to be available. Now, where do we save stuff? We're going to save stuff in that folder, and that's an avatar -cat as the name. Good. And that was the one question or one asset. Let's actually request the other asset as well. Icon PPT is on that one over there. So let's actually download it as well and save image as and save it to the same folder. And also let's actually copy the final URL, which was the documents preview, which is an imaginary review of the document. And let's download that one as well and save that to the same folder. Now, obviously, document preview would work with the document preview coming from the file assets, but in this case, we're just testing out the controls. So we're not actually going to operate against the Graph API or the files REST API in SharePoint. We're just going to test out that things are working properly. Now let's get back on the solution, and a few things maybe to notice here. Let me clear out that one. Because we are actually using the require entry here, and we are requiring these images from the components folder, we actually are getting them bundled inside of our solution as well. So we don't need to do any extra settings, any extra things to make all of those images being bundled or packaged inside of the solution as well. So now when we go back in here and we do observe, we can actually see that those images are being properly rendered from the right location as well, because they're being required to be available. So let's do observe, and the workbench should be loading. There we go. Let me close up the download and here, and let's actually open up the document example. And there we go. We can actually see there's the one image, there's another image, and there is another image. And the same, by the way, applies that the required will make the images available also as part of the solution package if you're using the package assets option. So all of those images are being packaged inside of the SBPKG file properly. So they will actually work properly when you're referencing them out in the production as well. In this case, we just wanted to test out the Office UI Fabric React components using an imaginary images, which were static images, not dynamic images coming from SharePoint Online. But using the Office UI Fabric React components, absolutely preferred option, a recommended option, because you get the same look and feel as what we use in the natively in SharePoint or in Office and Office Online in general. So please take advantage of these controls. There's also a separate set of controls, which are the PMP SPFX controls, which are super useful, which are even decorating more on top of the Office UI Fabric React controls. So we recommend using those as well, because they will increase your productivity as a developer. But anyway, that's all what we're going to do in this tutorial. So we basically started using the Office UI Fabric React controls. We used the DocumentCard control. We referenced some of the static images, not dynamic images from an existing files in SharePoint. And then we tested out the rendering of these components in the local workbench. And it looks pretty okay, pretty cool rendering for this setup. But like I said, that's all for this tutorial. Have a look on, if you're looking into more advanced scenarios related on using Office UI Fabric React, please have a look on our documentation, which is available. And if something is missing, please let us know and we'll get the documentation improved. Thank you.